Short is the story, long is the life.
Wukong's archive presents China Urban Legends, The Doorkeeper of Nanjing.
In the autumn of 2004, I was transferred to work in Nanjing. My workplace was on Zhujiang Road, and I rented an old house by Xuanwu Lake, at the foot of Taicheng, a stretch of the old city wall. The landlord's surname was Zhou, his name Zhou Shouqing. He was 78 that year and lived alone. The house was his family's ancestral home, built during the Republic era, blue-gray bricks, small black tiles, and on the lintel were carved the two characters, Shouhua, keep to simplicity. The paint mostly worn away, but the strokes still clear.
Old Zhou had planted a pomegranate tree at the gate. It had been planted 40 years and never borne fruit. The day I moved in, he pointed at the tree and said, "However long you live in Nanjing, that's how long it will take to bear fruit." I didn't understand at the time. Later I lived in Nanjing for 2 years. On the day I left, the pomegranate tree was still bare, not a single fruit. Old Zhou grew up by the city wall. His father, Zhou Laoshuan, had been a caretaker of the city wall during the Republic, in charge of that stretch of Taicheng. His grandfather was an old resident of Taicheng, living at the base of the wall for most of his life. Old Zhou knew better than anyone which section of the Nanjing wall had cracked, and which city gate sounded at night. The first night I moved in, he came over with a teapot, sat down, and said 2 things. One was, "If you hear someone calling you at night, don't answer." I asked why. He said, "The city gate recognizes voices. If you answer, it takes it as you agreeing to stay." The second thing, he thought about for a long time before he spoke. "Nanjing, this place. Underground is livelier than above ground. Don't think the city wall is solid. It's holding something down. And what's held down sometimes wants to come out for air."
I asked what it was holding down. He didn't answer. He lowered his head, took a sip of tea, and said, "Once you've lived here long enough, you'll know."
Ming Temple sits beside Taicheng, less than a 10-minute walk north from my front door. Of the 480 temples of the southern dynasties, how many towers and terraces remain in the mist and rain? Those 2 lines by Du Mu, the first temple they refer to is this one. Ming Temple's predecessor was Tongtai Temple. Emperor Wu of Liang, Shaoyan, gave himself up to the temple as a monk, 4 times in total. His ministers raised money to ransom him back 4 times, at 400 million coins per ransom. Old Zhou said that the ransom money was the very qi of Nanjing's earth. The emperor offered the city to the Buddha. The Buddha didn't take it, but the money stayed in the temple. An old monk at the temple said that from Liang to Chen, the karma of the southern dynasties had been pressed beneath Taicheng for over 1,000 years. What was suppressed in the well, what was weighed down by the city walls, what lay at the riverbed. Later, the walls were dismantled section by section, the wells filled in, and the things that had been held down began to loosen. The temple's most famous feature is the Rouge well. In the 9th year of the Sui dynasty's Kaihuang era, AD 589, the Sui army breached Taicheng. Chen's last ruler, Chen Shubao, hid in the well of Jingyang Palace with Zhang Lihua and consort Kong, where the Sui soldiers hauled them up. Legend has it that Zhang Lihua's rouge smudged onto the well curb, and the well water has shimmered with a rouge tint ever since. Hence the name Rouge Well, also known as the Well of Shame. Old Zhou's father, Zhou Laoshuan, worked as a handyman at Ming Temple for a few years during the Republican era. He told Old Zhou that the water's rouge tint wasn't just a legend. Every year on the Ghost Festival, the 15th day of the 7th lunar month, the well water really did show a thin layer of red, so faint you had to lean in close to see it. The temple's old monks forbade anyone from drawing water from the well on July 15th, saying, "The one in the well does not care for strangers." In 1966, during the Destroy the Four Olds campaign, the well at Ming Temple was filled in. The men doing the filling said that halfway through, a weeping sound came from inside the well, muffled, as if coming up through several layers of earth. A low moan. Whether it was crying or wind, no one could tell. The man in charge called for a halt, and everyone stood around the well listening for a long while. When no sound came again, they resumed filling. But that same night, all 4 men who had worked on the well dreamed the same dream. A woman in ancient dress sat on the well curb, hair loose, back turned to them, combing her hair stroke by stroke as she asked, "Where is my well? Where is my well?" The next day, when they compared notes, their faces went white. No one ever mentioned it again.
After the well was filled, an old gatekeeper monk at the temple, whose dharma name was Minggu, went to sit by the well every night to chant sutras, through wind and rain, for 3 straight years. In 1969, he passed away. Before he died, he instructed, every July 15th, place a bowl of clear water beside the well curb and leave it until dawn. The temple followed his instructions year after year. When someone asked why, the old monk said, "The well is filled, but its water still connects to the river. When the water wants to go home, someone must show it the way. A bowl of clear water is a road." Old Zhou said that monk Minggu was the last person at Nanjing Temple who dared approach that well at night. After he was gone, only those who set out the water on July 15th dared stand near the well curb after dark.
On July 15, 2004, I passed by Nanjing Temple at night. I saw a bowl of clear water set beside the well curb, bright and shimmering under the moonlight. An old lay Buddhist devotee with a full head of white hair was crouching beside it. When he saw me, he said nothing, only pointed at the bowl. I asked, "Who is the water for?" He said, "For the one in the well." Every July 15th, a bowl of water, a road. I asked, "A road for whom?" The old devotee thought for a moment and said, "For those who have gotten lost. The water connects to the Qinhuai River. The one in the well wants to go home. Following the water, she can get there." I stood there and watched him light 3 sticks of incense, the tips of the flames flaring and fading. As I came down the hill, I looked back. He was still crouching there, motionless like a stone. In the winter of 2004, I saw the well curb at Nanjing Temple, bluestone, sitting on open ground within the temple grounds. The well itself had already been filled level. During the 12th lunar month, frost fell on the temple grounds, and everything was white, except for 1 ring of dry ground around the well curb. Frost never landed on it. I asked the temple staff what was going on. They said they didn't know, it was like that every year. I crouched beside the well curb and listened once. The well was packed solid with earth, but when I pressed my ear to it, I could hear the sound of running water from far away. Faint, like the Qinhuai River flowing a few hundred meters off. When Old Zhou heard about this, he said only one thing: the well is a passage, it runs through to the Qinhuai River. You can fill in the well, but you can't fill in the water. Taicheng sits by Xuanwu Lake, a stretch of broken city wall, yet the most famous spot in Nanjing. The late Tang poet Wei Zhuang wrote, "River rain drizzles, river grasses grow even. The 6 dynasties pass like dreams, birds cry into the void. Most heartless are the willows of Taicheng, still shrouding the 10-li embankment in mist." Fine poetry that, but Old Zhou says the willows at Taicheng must never be counted. Whoever counts the willows atop Taicheng will never get the number right. No matter how many times they count, it always comes out 1 too many or 1 too few. Old Zhou says that when he was a kid, he used to go up to Taicheng to play, and the grown-ups warned him, "Don't count the willow trees." Once, out of mischief, he secretly counted them anyway. When he got to the 9th tree, he heard someone laugh behind him. Just one laugh, short, like someone who couldn't hold it in and let it slip out. He whipped his head around. No one was there. He ran home, and that very night he came down with a fever. It burned for 3 days, and he talked nonsense in his sleep, reciting numbers that never added up. His grandfather asked him what he had counted, and he said willow trees. Without another word, His grandfather took him to Taicheng, kneeled beneath the 7th willow tree, and kowtowed 3 times. Only then did the fever break. From that day on, Old Zhou never counted willows again, and he never set foot on Taicheng again either. In April 1949, on the eve of Nanjing's liberation, a platoon of the City Defense Force was stationed atop Taicheng. The platoon leader's surname was Ma, a Shandong man. That night, while making his rounds, he walked to the eastern end of the wall and, having nothing better to do, started counting willows. When he reached the 7th tree, he couldn't count any further, because beneath that 7th tree stood a man in an old military uniform, its vintage impossible to place. The man asked him, "Brother, which unit are you with?"
Platoon leader Ma gave his unit designation. The man gave an O, then said, "Then the city you're guarding belongs to someone else now."
Platoon leader Ma wanted to ask more, but the man had already vanished. He went back and told his soldiers, and no one believed him, but everyone felt a chill. At daybreak, Nanjing changed hands, and the whole platoon vanished without a trace. Their rifles were still there, their blankets folded neatly, but the men were gone. The disappearance of a platoon leader was reported up the chain, but no one had time to investigate. The city was falling. Who cared about one platoon? It wasn't until May of that year, when the troops taking over the city's defense were clearing Taicheng, that 7 skeletons were found in the wall's inner cavity. The wall is faced with brick, with a gap between the brick shell and the earthen core, and the 7 skeletons were stuffed into that gap, wearing the uniforms of the Beiyang army, each with a silver dollar clenched between its teeth. Old Zhou says those were soldiers from 1927. When the Northern Expeditionary Army attacked Nanjing, a platoon of Sun Quanfang's troops was holding Taicheng. When the city fell, they had no time to retreat, were cornered inside the wall's cavity, and were sealed in alive. The year they were sealed in, each of them bit down on a silver dollar. As the old folks said, if you cross over with a silver dollar in your mouth, you won't be poor in the next life. They bit their silver dollars and waited their whole lives, but no one ever came to open the wall.
When the skeletons were being cleaned out, Zhou Laoshan was present. He was the city wall administrator at the time. Old Zhou says his father came home and didn't speak for 3 full days. On the 4th day he finally opened his mouth and said just one thing. That platoon leader counted to the 7th willow tree, and the man beneath that tree asked him, "Which unit are you with?" He wasn't asking about the unit designation. He was asking about the city.
After 1949, Zhou Laoshan never set foot on Taicheng again. He applied for a transfer to look after Ming Xiaoling, the Ming Xiaoling Mausoleum, and guarded its back gate for over a decade until he retired. Xiaoling Tomb is Zhu Yuanzhang's mausoleum, at the southern foot of Purple Mountain. There's a legend about why Zhu Yuanzhang chose this spot. He'd taken a liking to dignified Dragon Peak's pearl-playing summit, and the feng shui master said it was a land of the coiled dragon. Water in front, mountain behind, guardians on both sides. Empress Ma died first, so she was buried there first, which is why it's called Xiaoling, the filial, from ruling the world through filial piety. Later, when Zhu Yuanzhang died, on the day of his funeral procession, 13 coffins were carried out of Nanjing's 13 city gates at the same time, and no one knew which one held the real body. Old Zhou said that was the Zhu family way. When a man departs, no one gets to trace his path. When the Ming founder built Xiaoling, he established the Xiaoling Wei garrison, stationing over 5,000 military households there to guard the tomb for generations, through the Ming dynasty's fall, through the Qing, through the Republic. That's where the place name Xiaoling Wei comes from. Old Sun's family were descendants of those 5,000 garrison troops. His ancestors stood at Xiaoling's gate back in the Hanggu years. Old Sun said the rule passed down by word of mouth from his forebears was, the stone beast's eyes get wiped once a year, on the winter solstice, and after wiping them you must not look back. They'd done it for over 600 years. Not a single day missed. He asked me, "Tell me, eyes that get wiped every day for 600 years, what can they see?" The spirit path in front of the tomb is called Stone Elephant Road, lined with 2 rows of stone beasts. Lions, xieji, camels, elephants, qilin, horses, 2 of each, 12 pairs in all, over 600 years old. Old Zhou said the beasts on Stone Elephant Road had a quirk. They turn around. The spirit path at Stone Elephant Road isn't straight, it bends partway along. Legend has it Zhu Yuanzhang was making way for Sun Quan. Plum Blossom Mountain sits right across the path, where Sun Quan, the Wu ruler of the 3 kingdoms, is buried. The feng shui master said digging into the mountain would damage the dragon vein, but Zhu Yuanzhang said, Sun Quan was a hero too. Let him stay and guard my gate. So the spirit path curved around Plum Blossom Mountain. Old Sun said the curve had a purpose. A gatekeeper can't face the gate head-on. In the winter of 1937, as the Japanese army closed in on Nanjing, before the Battle of Nanjing began, the old folks of Xiaoling said that for several nights, the sound of stone dragging across the ground echoed along Stone Elephant Road all night long, muffled like something massive shifting its den. At dawn people went to look. All 12 pairs of stone beasts had turned their heads. They'd been facing the tomb, and overnight they'd all turned west. West toward Chongqing, toward the direction of escape. Old Zhou said his grandfather served at Xiaoling when he was young and had made a point of observing those stone beasts. Back then they faced north, toward the tomb, toward Zhu Yuanzhang. But when I went in 2004, the beasts were all facing west. The tour guide said the spirit path at Stone Elephant Road had always faced west, for over 600 years. I didn't believe it, so I went specifically to ask Old Sun, the tomb guardian. Old Sun was from Xiaoling, his family guarding the tomb for generations. He was the 7th generation. When he heard what I said, he didn't even lift his eyelids, just said, when your grandfather's generation looked, they faced north. Now you look and they face west, so in all those decades in between, they never moved once? You believe that?
I said, how can stone move? Old Sun said, the stone doesn't move. It's the people living in Nanjing who move. Which way they face depends on who's living in Nanjing.
In 1958, during the Great Leap Forward, someone in Xilingwei wanted to smash the stone beasts to make steel. The leader was a strong laborer. He swung a sledgehammer at the leg of a stone lion. On the first strike, the hammer bounced back and knocked out 2 of his front teeth. He crouched on the ground holding his mouth, blood seeping through his fingers. The people around helped him back. The next morning, everyone in Xilingwei heard sounds on Stone Elephant Road. Dragging sounds all night, stone grinding against stone, rustling, as if someone was walking slowly. Some brave souls went to look. All 12 pairs of stone beasts had turned around, facing north again, toward the tomb. After that, no one dared touch those stone beasts again. The old people of Xilingwei passed down a saying. When the stone beasts turn around, it's not about the stone beasts. It means something's wrong in the city. In the winter of 2004, one night I stayed very late on Stone Elephant Road. The tourists were all gone. The streetlights were dim and yellow, and the shadows of the stone beasts stretched long. I heard a sound dull, dragging, coming from the other end of the spirit path, like something very heavy taking a small step on the blue stone slabs. I stopped and listened carefully. The sound stopped. I took 2 steps forward, and the sound came again, closer this time. I turned around. Behind me was a stone camel, standing there quietly, its shadow pressed beneath the streetlight, completely still. I hurried back to Xilingwei and went to find Old Sunday. Old Sun listened, not surprised at all, and said, "You heard that? That's the changing of the guard."
I said, stone beasts change guard too?
Old Sun said, "Stone beasts don't need to change guard, stone beasts stand. The ones changing guard are something else. Under the spirit path there's another path. What walks on that path isn't stone."
I asked what it was. Old Sun didn't say any more. He got up and poured me a cup of tea, and said, "You live at the foot of Taicheng. Your landlord's father once guarded this gate. Whatever he should have told you, he already did. What he didn't tell you, don't ask.
The next day, during the day, I made a special trip back to Stone Elephant Road to look at that stone camel. It was covered in dust, standing there quietly, exactly like the night before. I walked around it once. On the base of its right hind hoof, I saw a fresh mark, a whitish streak on the blue stone, as if something had just scraped against it. I reached out and touched it. Cold, rough, and a layer of stone powder came off on my fingers. It was new. I crouched there and looked at it for a long time.
When I went back and told Old Sun, he was silent for a moment, then said, "The spot you stood at last night, it moved half a step away this morning."
I said, "How do you know?" Old Sun said, "I've guarded this place for over 60 years, counting where they stand every day. A distance of more than half a hoofprint, I can tell at a glance." I said, "Why did it move?"
Old Sun said, "It moved away from where you stood. You stood in front of it all night, so it remembered you. When a stone beast remembers a person, that's not a good thing." During the Ming Dynasty, a eunuch stole a small piece of a stone beast's horn on Stone Elephant Road, ground it up to use as a medicinal ingredient, and died in the palace that very night. When his body was carried out, he was still clutching that piece of stone in his hand. The stone beast's things must not be touched. Touch them, and it remembers you for the rest of your life. Linggu Temple is on the eastern slope of Purple Mountain. Inside the temple there's a beamless hall, built in the Ming Dynasty. The whole hall has not a single beam, not a single pillar. It's held up entirely by brick arched vaults, and it stood for over 600 years. In 1928, the nationalist government built the National Revolutionary Army Memorial Cemetery for fallen soldiers here, and the Beamless Hall was turned into a memorial hall. One by one, stone tablets were set into the hall's walls, inscribed with the names of fallen soldiers. More than 33,000 of them, one after another, densely packed, running from the base of the walls all the way to the top. Old Zhou said the walls of the Beamless Hall are double-layered, with a cavity between the brick walls. In December 1937, during the last days of the Battle of Nanjing, the defenders retreated to Purple Mountain, and Linggu Temple served as a field hospital for the wounded. When they withdrew, the seriously wounded couldn't be taken along, so they were left in the hall. Later the city fell, and not one person in that hall ever came out again. In 1998, during repairs on the Beamless Hall, workers found 7 skeletons in the wall cavity, wearing military uniforms, with shrapnel stuck in their ribs. People from the Cultural Relics Department came, looked it over, said it was remains from the War of Resistance, registered them and left. What happened after that, nobody knows. The day I went to the Beamless Hall, it was an afternoon. The hall was gloomy and eerie, several degrees colder than outside. I went along the wall, looking at tablet after tablet at those names. Some had their native places carved beneath the name, some had only the name. When I got to the 7th tablet, I heard a sound from inside the wall: thump, thump, thump. 3 knocks, very light, like someone tapping on the other side of the wall with their knuckles.
I pressed my ear to the wall and listened, but there was no sound at all. The caretaker came over and said it was thermal expansion. Old buildings all do that. I said, "This hall has no beams, the wall is brick. Does brick also expand and contract with heat?" The caretaker gave me a look and said, "The brick doesn't expand. It's something in the wall that expands."
I asked him what was in the wall. He didn't answer, turned around and left.
I stood in the hall and read those names again. 33,000 names, carved in neat rows, like soldiers lined up waiting for roll call. Suddenly I thought, if the owners of those names were all still here, standing in this hall, what a huge crowd they'd make. The hall was cold, damp, bone-chilling. I couldn't stay any longer and turned to go out. When I left the hall, there was a register at the door for signatures. The caretaker looked at me and said, "You were in there 40 minutes, and you only looked at 7 tablets." I didn't say anything. He lowered his voice and added, you can't stay long in this hall. Stay too long, and the names will remember you. Once they remember you, no matter where you go, they'll know.
I asked him if anything had ever happened to anyone in this hall. He said, yes. During that maintenance in 1998, there was a worker who stayed alone in the hall one night to weld a scaffold. The next morning, he was gone. They searched for 3 days and found him in the wall cavity. How he got into that cavity, nobody can say. When he came out, he was insane, muttering one sentence over and over. He paused, then said, what he muttered was, "Did they call my name?"
That night I had a dream. I dreamed I was inside a wall, pitch black, and in front of me were rows and rows of names, giving off a faint light, like carved inscriptions. I walked forward, and those names followed me. Suddenly someone spoke behind me, his voice very soft. Who are you looking for?
I said I wasn't looking for anyone. He said, if you're not looking for someone, why did you come in here? Everyone who comes into this wall is looking for someone. Once they find them, they go out. Those who don't find them, he didn't finish. But after I woke up, I remembered those words for a long time.
The Qinhuai River runs straight through Nanjing, and the Confucius Temple sits right on its bank. After nightfall, the painted boats line up one after another, with bright lights and merry drinking, the sound of oars blending with the dancing shadows of lanterns. But Old Zhou said the waters of the Qinhuai are alive, and at night, an extra boat would always appear among the painted ones. In 1998, the year of the Great Flood, there was a boatman at the Confucius Temple named Wei who had been poling boats for 20 years. That year on Ghost Festival, he docked his boat late and counted the painted boats along the shore. There was one extra. At its bow sat a lantern, and beneath the lantern was a yellow paper slip with a name written on it. Boatman Wei didn't dare look too closely. He pulled the paper out and threw it into the river. The paper floated on the surface for a moment, then sank. When he looked back, the extra boat was already gone.
That night, Boatman Wei had a dream. He dreamt he was sitting on that extra boat, with no one pulling it, drifting on its own toward the middle of the river. Standing in the middle of the river was a figure, back turned to him, who asked, "Where's my paper?" Boatman Wei woke up in terror, drenched in cold sweat. The next day he fell ill, a fever that burned for an entire month. After the fever broke, he never dared to take the night boat again. When people asked him what he'd seen, he'd close his eyes and shake his head, not saying a single word.
After Old Zhou finished the story, he told me, every ghost festival, the Qinhuai takes one boatman. The name on the paper is the one being taken that year. All the boatmen know this rule. When they see it, they pretend they didn't. Only Wei pulled the paper out. Once the paper left the boat marked him. He was lucky, burned for a month and didn't die. But his life belongs to the river now. Old Yu had told me the same rule. Old Yu was the boatman who later grabbed me by the wrist. He said he'd been poling boats for 30 years, and the Ghost Festival rule had been passed down from boatman to boatman through the generations. At night, you could only count the painted boats, never point at them. Count them and you knew in your heart that was fine. But point at one and the boat would remember you. Back in his master's generation, there was a boatman who pointed once. His hand started shaking right after, and it shook for the rest of his life. Never stopped until the day he died. Old Yu also said that on Ghost Festival night you had to count the lights on the river carefully. The lanterns on the painted boats, the lamps in the temple, the lights on the bridges, they were all for the living to see. The one extra light wasn't a lantern at all. It was the flame on an invitation. He pointed at the dock. You see? The flame on the invitation hasn't been lit yet tonight. Once it's lit, someone's getting on that boat. I asked him what would happen when it was lit. He said, once it's lit, the name on the paper is bound for the boat. And once they're on that boat, they're no longer one of the living on shore. On Ghost Festival in 2004, I was at the Confucius Temple dock watching the painted boats. I counted once 26 boats. I didn't believe it, so I counted again, 27. The extra one was moored at the very edge of the dock, with a lantern at its bow and a yellow paper slip pressed beneath it. I took 2 steps closer, wanting to see what was written on the paper. Then someone grabbed my wrist from behind. An old boatman, surname Yu. He pulled me back and said in a low voice, "Stop counting. If you can't count it clearly, then don't count it."
I said, "I just want to see what's written on the paper." Old Zhou said, "What's there to see? The name on that paper is whoever's getting on the boat this year. If you see it clearly, it'll think you're there to fetch people. Are you taking someone away for it, or is it taking you away?"
I didn't dare go home that night. I sat by the Confucius Temple until dawn. The next day, when I went back, that extra boat was gone. No matter how many times I counted, it was still 26. Peach Leaf Ferry sits where the Qinhuai River meets Green Creek. Legend has it that Wang Xianji of the Eastern Jin dynasty came here to welcome his beloved concubine Peach Leaf, and wrote a poem, "Peach Leaf, oh Peach Leaf, crossing the river needs no oar. Just cross without worry. I myself will greet you." From then on, the ferry was called Peach Leaf Ferry. At the ferry landing stands a stone tablet, with the 3 characters Peach Leaf Ferry recarved during the Republican era. Old Zhou said that beneath the tablet is pressed an old stone, a mooring stone from the ferry's early days, the very one Wang Xianji's boat had been tied to. In 1966, someone tried to pry up that old stone. Halfway through, they heard someone humming a song beneath the water. A soft, lilting tune, the song of Peach Leaf. It hummed 2 lines and stopped. The man's legs gave out. He knelt by the riverbank and never dared touch it again. That old stone is still pressed there now, beneath the new tablet. During the day I went to look at the tablet, and sure enough there was a crack in the base with a black stone wedged inside, one corner exposed, worn smooth and shiny, as if it had been touched for over 1,000 years. I crouched down. The moment my fingertip touched that stone, a chill crawled up through my fingers, and I snatched my hand back. The stone steps at the Peach Leaf Ferry dock number 16 during the day. At night, they number 17. The extra step. If you step on it, you'll hear the sound of water glug, a dull sound, as if the ground beneath your feet is hollow, with water just under the stone slabs. In 1966, a young man who didn't believe in such things went to count the steps at Peach Leaf Ferry at night. He counted to the 16th step, then took one more step up, 17. He stepped down firm, and from beneath his feet came a glug. The next moment, he pitched forward and plunged headfirst into the river. The people on shore fished him out. He'd swallowed a bellyful of water, and after he was revived, he kept saying, "Someone in the river pulled me. Someone in the river pulled me." Later he moved away and never came back. Old Zhou said the step he'd stepped on wasn't a step at all. It was something Peach Leaf Ferry had been waiting over 1,000 years for. Peach Leaf made it across, but someone didn't, and they've been waiting under the water all this time.
In the autumn of 2004, I went during the day and counted. 16 steps, no mistake. At night, I went again. No one was at the dock. The street lamps cast patches of broken light on the river's surface. I counted up step by step, 1, 2, 3, 16. When I finished, I stood on the 16th step and looked at the water. The river was pitch black and still, the pleasure boats were all moored elsewhere, and this stretch of river was as quiet as a mirror. As if possessed, I took one more step up. The 17th step, I stepped down firm. From beneath my feet came a sound, glug, muffled, like something under the stone slabs had turned over. Every hair on my body stood on end. I stood there, not daring to move. The sound of water spread slowly from beneath my feet, ring after ring, creeping up the steps. I looked down. Water was seeping out of the cracks between the stones, ice cold, pressing against the soles of my shoes. I scrambled off the dock, crawling and stumbling, and ran all the way back to Taicheng in one breath. The next day I went again in daylight, crouched at the dock and counted 16 steps, not one more, not one less. In the sun, the stone steps were bone dry, without even a trace of dampness.
Yuhua, the Rainflower Terrace, sits south of the city. Legend has it that during the reign of Emperor Wu of Liang, monk Yunguang preached sutras here, and his words were so eloquent that flowers rained down from heaven, moved by his devotion. The falling blossoms turned to stone, Yuhua stones. The stones are smooth and round, with layer upon layer of patterns. Red like blood, yellow like honey, green like moss. But Old Zhou didn't believe that story. He said Yuhua has been a place of killing since ancient times. The Qing dynasty killed Taiping rebels there, the Republic killed revolutionaries. What dynasty hasn't chopped off heads on this terrace? The stones drink blood, blood seeps into the stone, a layer of blood, a layer of mud, pressing out those layer upon layer of patterns. Every layer of pattern is one person. Hold a Yuhua stone in your hand and look at it against the light. If you're lucky, you can see a tiny human figure inside the pattern. Old Zhou also said that stones from Yuhua can't be taken home. Pick up a stone on the terrace, tuck it in your pocket, and bring it home. That night you're guaranteed to dream. Dreaming that the terrace is packed with people. A dark, dense crowd, one next to another, all facing you, not saying a word. Return the stone the next day, and the dream goes away. During the Republic era, someone tried it. After he returned the stone, he told everyone he met, and no one dared take stones from the terrace anymore. The Yuhua stones sold at the scenic area entrance are all picked from the riverbank, smooth and clean, not carrying the terrace's aura. When he said this, he glanced at me, a look like he already knew that the bundle I'd bought wasn't entirely riverbank stones. Old Zhou said his father, Zhou Laoshuan, once picked up a stone at Yuhua during the Republic era. It was round, about the size of a pigeon egg. He held it to the light, and inside the stone was a figure in a long gown, standing with his hands behind his back, like he was waiting for someone. Zhou Laoshuan's skin crawled. He threw the stone away. The next morning it was under his pillow. He threw it again into the pond below Yuhua. The third morning the stone was still under his pillow, soaking wet with mud from the pond on it. The third time he carved a cross into the stone, rode his bicycle to the Yangtze River, and threw it into the river. After that, the stone never came back. In 2004, I bought a bundle of Yuhua stones at the entrance to the Yuhua scenic area. 5 yuan a bundle, strung together with red cord. Back at my place that night, I held each one up to the desk lamp one by one. All the other stones were fine except one. Grayish-white base, and inside it a shadow, dark, like a person kneeling, head bowed, kneeling in the middle of the stone. The more I looked at it, the more uncomfortable I felt. I untied it from the cord and threw it into the trash can in the hallway.
The next morning, I woke up and something under my pillow was pressing into me. I reached under and touched it, that stone, grayish-white, lying quietly under my pillow. The person inside the stone was still kneeling.
I took the stone to Old Zhou. He took it, looked at it, didn't say a word, and put it in his own pocket. After a long while, he said, "It's taken a liking to you. Don't throw it away, throwing it won't do any good. When it gets tired of you on its own, it'll leave on its own." I asked when it would get tired. Old Zhou said, "When the person it's waiting for comes, it'll leave." Who's it waiting for?
Old Zhou didn't answer. He put the stone into his inner pocket and said, "For now, I'll keep this for you."
The Nanjing Yangtze River Bridge, completed in 1968, was the first road-rail dual-purpose bridge on the Yangtze designed and built entirely by Chinese hands. The bridge took 8 years to build, and as the piers rose one after another, the whole city of Nanjing emptied out to watch. Old Zhou said that in the first few years after the bridge opened, the soldiers guarding it were a prized assignment. If you could stand guard on that bridge, your family felt honored. Old Zhou knew a retired bridge guard named Su, a man from Suzhou. Old Zhou joined the army in 1968 and was assigned to the Bridge Guard Unit, where he served for 11 years straight. He said the days on the bridge were simple. By daylight you watched the river, at night you watched the lights. Everything was fine except for one thing. Beneath the bridge piers, there were voices.
One night in the summer of 1976, Old Zhou was on the night shift when he heard someone singing beneath the pier. It wasn't a military song, and it wasn't a revolutionary song. It was a folk tune from his hometown, soft and gentle, rising up across the water. He couldn't quite make out the words, but the melody he remembered. It was the lullaby his mother used to hum when putting him to sleep. He leaned over the railing and looked down. Beneath the pier, circles of ripples spread across the water's surface, and at the very center of those ripples, nothing. He called out, "Who's down there?" The singing stopped. Something floated up to the surface of the water, a shoe. An old cloth shoe, sole facing up, and on the sole were embroidered 3 characters. He couldn't make them out clearly. He thought about trying to fish it out, but he couldn't reach it. At first light the next morning he went back to look, and the shoe was gone. In 1979, Old Zhou was discharged from the army. The night before he left, he heard that singing again. He stood at the same spot, called out over the water, "Who are you, really?" The singing stopped. The water was still for a while, and then that old cloth shoe floated up again, resting in the same place, sole facing upward, as if waiting for him. He didn't dare reach for it. After leaving the army, Old Zhou came back to Nanjing every August, stood on the bridge for a while. He couldn't say why, he just felt like going. In 1999, on his last visit, he ran into an old woman on the bridge. She was dressed very neatly, and she asked him, "Comrade, have you seen my shoe?" Old Zhou froze on the spot. That voice, soft and light, was the very singing he'd heard beneath the pier in 1976. He said nothing, turned, and ran off the bridge. He bought the earliest ticket he could and went back to Suzhou. From that day on, he never went to Nanjing again. In 2010, Old Zhou passed away. His last phone call was to Old Zhou, and he said, "That pair of shoes, they're still under the bridge." In the winter of 2004, I went to the bridge myself. The wind-up on the deck was fierce, strong enough to make a person lose their footing. I stood at the middle of the bridge for a while, and the wind seemed to carry a voice, faint, broken, as if rising up from under the water. I leaned over the railing and looked down. The river was muddy yellow, and the shadows of the piers were deep and black. An armed police guard walked up to me and asked, "Comrade, what are you doing?"
I said, "Listening to a song." He looked me up and down and said, "People jump off this bridge every day. Don't do anything rash." I said, "I'm not here to jump. I'm here to listen." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "So you heard it too?"
I didn't answer. He didn't ask again. He turned and walked away, and after a few steps, he looked back at me once.
In the Old Zhou family estate, there was an air raid shelter in the back courtyard, dug in 1935. In those years, Nanjing was the capital of the Republic of China, and air raid shelters were being built all over the city in preparation against Japanese airstrikes. Old Zhou said his family's shelter was dug deep. 2 flights of steps down, 1 turn, and inside it could hold 7 or 8 people crouching. At the end of November 1937, the Japanese army was closing in on Nanjing, and panic gripped the city. Old Zhou was 11 that year. His grandfather made the call. The whole family, carrying dry rations and water, hid inside the air raid shelter. They hid there for 7 days and 7 nights. Inside the shelter burned a single oil lamp, extinguished during the day, lit at night, for fear that outside eyes might see the glow.
On the evening of the 7th day, the oil lamp suddenly went out completely, not blown out by wind, but the kind of sudden extinguishing, as if someone had reached out and covered it with a hand. The shelter fell pitch black, and no one dared make a sound. Just then, a knocking came from the shelter entrance, thump, 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 3 times, very light, like someone rapping with their knuckles. Grandfather clamped a hand over Old Zhou's mouth and said in a hushed voice, "Nobody make a sound. Nobody move." The knocking paused for a moment, then came 3 more times. This time it was even lighter, as if the knocks had lost most of their strength. Then a voice came through from outside the door, muffled through the wooden planks, "Fine, if you won't open. I'll come again tomorrow."
The next day, Nanjing fell. Old Zhou only learned later that that day was December 13th, 1937.
During those 7 days, the sound of gunfire and artillery outside never stopped, sometimes distant, sometimes near. Old Zhou said his grandfather forbade anyone from crying. "If you cry out loud, they'll hear us outside," he said. The whole family gritted their teeth, not daring to make a sound. The dry rations ran out on the 5th day. For the last 2 days, each person got 1 bowl of water a day. On the evening of the 7th day, just before the oil lamp went out, his great-grandmother suddenly spoke. She was in her 80s that year, hard of hearing, a woman of few words, and had barely said anything in the 7 days of hiding. When the lamp went out, she was sitting in the deepest corner, and suddenly said, "Don't be afraid. The one knocking is someone familiar." Grandfather asked her who it was. Great-grandmother didn't answer. After a long while, she said only one line, "He is my father."
Old Zhou said that great-grandmother's father had been a night watchman in Taicheng. During the days when the Northern Expedition Army attacked Nanjing in 1927, the city walls were in chaos, and her father didn't come home for an entire night. At dawn, someone found his watchman's rattle at the foot of the city wall, but he was gone. His body was never found. Later, when the wall's inner cavity was cleaned out, 7 skeletons were pulled from it, but whether any of them was great-grandmother's father, no one could tell. When her father left, great-grandmother had not yet married. That year she was 22. She waited her whole life, and remembered her father's voice to her dying day.
The next day, the knocking never came again.
Old Zhou said that during those 7 days in the shelter, the 7 cats the family kept ran away, one by one. 2 ran off the first day, 2 more on the 3rd, and by the 7th day, not a single cat was left. Grandfather said the cats died in people's place the day the city fell. The cats were outside the shelter, and they knocked on the door for the whole family.
In 1966, the air raid shelter was being filled in. Halfway through, 7 sets of cat bones were dug out, laid in a neat row at the entrance, all their heads facing into the shelter, like 7 cats crouching there, guarding the opening. The men filling the pit were terrified, said the shelter must not be filled, dropped their tools and ran. After that, no one ever brought up filling it again. So when I went to see it in 2004, the shelter was still there, only half filled, and you could still go inside. One afternoon in the winter of 2004, Old Zhou took me to see that air raid shelter. The cave was at the back of the courtyard, covered by dead grass and bricks. We lifted off a cement slab and exposed the pitch-black entrance. Holding a flashlight, I followed Old Zhou down 2 flights of steps, turned a corner, and reached the bottom of the cave. The cave was dry with no musty smell. The walls were covered with carved characters, crooked, uneven in depth, as if different people in different years had carved them with fingernails or stones. I shone my light on one section of the wall. Carved there were the words, December 13th, 1937. Wang Shui was here. Below it, a line of smaller characters, guard until when? Another line below that, guard until someone comes to open the door.
I swept the light across the wall, and the carvings grew more numerous. Qian Daigui here, guarding until dawn. Qin Yongyan, my child just turned 1 month old, guarding until I go home. Zhang Shoren, guarding until the city grows quiet. At the end was a line carved very deep, as if great force had been used, guard until someone comes to open the door. Once the door opens, everyone gets out. There was another line on the wall, carved the shallowest of all, as if scratched with a fingernail. They call me the doorkeeper. Someone inside the door calls me too. This line had no signature, no date. I pointed at it and asked Old Zhou. He looked at it for a long time, then said, "This line was already here when I was a kid." I asked my grandfather, and he said it was carved by an earlier doorkeeper. After carving these words, that man never came back out of the cave. At the deepest part of the cave stood a stone door, set into the earthen wall. The crack between the door and the frame was very thin, and stuffed into it was a piece of yellow paper, its corner sticking out. Old Zhou walked up to the door, crouched down, and said, "This was a rule my grandfather established. Every winter solstice, he wrote on a piece of yellow paper and stuffed it into the crack until only a corner remained. The next morning, when he came back, the corner would be sticking out a little further, as if something inside the door had pushed the paper outward a bit."
I said, "Pushed outward? Something inside the door stuffed it out?" Old Zhou said, "I don't know. My grandfather kept doing it until he died, then I took over one piece a year, for over 60 years now. The paper never stays in. You push it in, it pushes it back out, one piece a year, never missed a single time. Grandfather's final instruction was, the paper must never be pulled out. As long as the paper is there, the door is there. If the paper is gone, the door opens."
I crouched down, moved close to the door, and tried to see through the crack. The crack was too narrow, pitch black inside, nothing visible. But I heard a sound, very soft, very even, rising and falling, like someone leaning against the other side of the door, asleep, breathing. I shot upright and looked at Old Zhou. Old Zhou looked back at me and said nothing. After a moment, he spoke slowly, "You heard it too.
Is there someone in there? Whether there's someone, I don't know. All I know is, behind this door, it's not earth." Old Zhou stood up and brushed the dust off his knees. My grandfather said that here in Nanjing, underground is livelier than above ground. The ones crushed under the city walls, the ones sealed in the wells, the ones lying at the bottom of the river, and the ones waiting behind this door, they're all people who never got to leave. They don't leave because the door hasn't opened. The moment the door opens, they can go. Go where? Old Zhou thought for a moment, then said, "My grandfather said, when they go home."
In the fall of 2011, I went to Nanjing on business and went back to visit Old Zhou. Old Zhou was 85. His back was bent, his ears were going, but he was still spirited. The pomegranate tree by his door had borne fruit for the first time. 3 of them, bright red, hanging from the branches. Old Zhou pointed at the tree and said, "See that? It remembers you. The 2 years you lived in Nanjing, it didn't bear a single fruit. You leave, and now it's borne fruit to save for you."
I said, "Saved for me?" Old Zhou said, "Saved for you. Trees have their own memories. You lived at its doorstep, and it'll remember you for the rest of its life."
I asked about Stone Elephant Road. Old Zhou said that in 2010 they announced the sacred way would be restored, and before the construction crew even set foot on site, the stone beasts had already turned their heads, facing north again toward the tomb. The old folks in Xiaoling Way said this was the stone beasts taking a stand. When there's a stir in the city, they take their positions first. I asked about the willow trees on the Taicheng wall. Old Zhou said the 7th one had withered and died. The same one platoon commander Ma had counted that night in 1949. No one dared cut down the dead willow. The stump was still standing there. Old Zhou said, "It saw something it shouldn't have. Its time was up."
I asked him about that door. Old Zhou said, "The door's still there. The paper's still being stuffed in. This year's winter solstice one, I stuffed it in last month. Come back and take a look, and a corner of the paper will have worked its way out again." As I listened, I felt something I couldn't put into words. I said, "Uncle Zhou, maybe you should stop stuffing the paper."
Old Zhou laughed, and the wrinkles on his face pressed together. Stop stuffing? If I stop, the door opens. As long as the paper's there, the door's there. If the paper's gone, the door opens, and who knows if what's behind that door is the city of Nanjing, or something else. The day I left, Old Zhou walked me to the mouth of the alley and fished something out of his pocket, pressing it into my hand. It was that rain-flower stone, grayish-white, with the figure inside still kneeling. Old Zhou said, "The person it's waiting for never came. Never once. I threw it away twice for you. Each time I threw it, it came back. Last month I threw it again, and this time it didn't come back. You keep it with you. Don't throw it again. If it ends up back under your pillow, that means it's chosen you. When the person it's waiting for shows up, it'll leave on its own." I gripped the stone and said nothing. In the winter of 2012, Old Zhou passed away, at 86. His nephew was sorting through his belongings and found a stack of yellow paper under his pillow, more than 60 sheets, one for every year, not one missing, piled up neatly. I recognized the top sheet, the one from the winter of 2004, the one I watched him stuff into the door crack with his own hands, the character written on it in cinnabar, the paper edge still creased from being wedged in the crack. His nephew said the door crack was clean as could be, nothing in it at all. Not one sheet of all the paper stuffed in over the years had stayed in the door. Old Zhou had taken them back one by one and pressed them under his pillow, and kept them there his whole life. There was also a note under the pillow, in Old Zhou's handwriting, crooked and shaky, just one character, open. I gripped that rain-flower stone, standing on my end of the phone line, and didn't say a word for a long time. The night Old Zhou died, I had a dream. I dreamed of the willow trees on the Taicheng wall, a misty rain drifting over the river, willow branches hanging down below the wall. Sitting on the stump of the seventh tree was a man in an old military uniform, who asked me, "Comrade, what unit are you from?"
I said, "I'm not from any unit. I'm in Nanjing on business." He said, "Oh, so you're a guest." I said, "Didn't the city fall long ago?" He said, "The city fell. But there are still people guarding it."
When I woke from the dream, someone was knocking at the window, very soft, 3 taps, like knuckles rapping on the glass. I lay in bed. I didn't move. I didn't answer. I didn't open the door. That's the story. What do you think? If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe. New urban legend every day.